SpaceX just confidentially filed for what might be the biggest IPO in history. Here's what you need to know. SpaceX isn't just a rocket company anymore, it's a multi-program machine doing a lot at once, but analysts tend to frame this IPO around three big storylines. The rocket business that proved it can reach orbit reliably, the Starlink network that drives much of the revenue, and the Starship program pushing toward much bigger missions. First, the rocket business, the part of SpaceX that actually puts things into orbit for NASA and commercial customers. It's the foundational capability that makes everything else SpaceX does possible. Over just 5 years, SpaceX went from a few dozen launches a year to 165 orbital missions in 2025, a cadence that leaves other companies and even entire nations in the dust. It's how SpaceX got the credibility and the hardware to attempt things like Starlink and Starship. Then there's Starlink, the part of SpaceX that looks most like a real consumer business. People pay monthly and get broadband from low Earth orbit satellites. That moving line of what looks like stars you might have seen crossing the night sky, that's thousands of Starlink internet satellites. And as of late 2025, they've been serving roughly 9 million customers globally. One research estimate puts SpaceX's 2025 revenue at around $15 billion, with about 60% of that coming just from Starlink. That recurring subscription money is why analysts keep calling Starlink the financial engine of the IPO. And finally, there's Starship, SpaceX's giant, fully reusable rocket system. It's designed to carry far more to space than today's rockets and to be flown, landed, and reused. And it's the vehicle NASA picked to land astronauts on the moon and eventually chase Musk's hope of reaching Mars. NASA has already committed roughly $4 billion in contracts dedicated to Starship's human landing system and its upgraded version for a crewed moon mission later in the decade. These contracts don't turn Starship into a cash machine yet, but they show how big the ambitions are and why SpaceX is expected to need public market money, which brings us to the market level. Reports say SpaceX is aiming to raise around $75 billion in its IPO. The current IPO record is Saudi Aramco, which raised about $25.6 billion when it listed in 2019. So even if SpaceX somehow came in at the lower end, say $50 billion, that would still be roughly double the biggest IPO in history, and at $75 billion, almost 3 times the record deal. In 2025, roughly 200 US IPOs together raised about $44 billion. A single $75 billion SpaceX deal would be bigger than that entire year's IPO market by itself, an astronomical sum for a single listing. Then there's who actually gets to buy it. In a typical US IPO, everyday investors are estimated to end up with maybe 5 to 10% of the shares, with 90% or more going to big funds and other institutions. For SpaceX, multiple reports say Elon Musk is considering giving up to 30% of the IPO shares to individual investors, roughly tripling the usual retail slice. To pull off something at this scale, SpaceX has reportedly lined up a 21-bank underwriting syndicate, a network of investment banks that design the deal, take orders, and route shares out to both big institutions and regular brokerage accounts. Finally, there's the question of what all this adds up to in market value. Recent reporting says the IPO could value SpaceX at more than $1.75 trillion. For context, Saudi Aramco's record IPO valued it at roughly $1.7 trillion, and other top IPOs don't come close to that. In other words, investors are being asked to put a $1 trillion plus price on a company built from today's Starlink cash flows and tomorrow's Starship ambitions. Whether that bet holds up is the question this IPO is about to test.